We have a question about eating kosher. The actual question comes from Matthew 15 about the fact that unkosher food doesn't make you unclean. Because in Matthew 15, we read something, and I want to read this with you. And it seems like there is a great problem with eating kosher or with the laws of Leviticus about the food. Yeshua says in Matthew 15, verse 17, "Do you not yet understand that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and is eliminated?" So he's saying that if something enters into your stomach, don't worry about it, because he's saying that in this idea that food doesn't make you unclean. Just read a few verses earlier. It's not in verse 11, not what goes into the mouth that defiles a man, but what comes out of the mouth. This defiles a man. So does this mean that we can eat what we like? Does this mean that the idea of eating kosher is gone? Well, Matthew 15 has nothing to do with food. It is not a food story. You need to read from verse 1 to understand Matthew 15 and this idea of kosher and being unclean. Matthew 15, verse 1, the scribes and the Pharisees, again, those guys, those who wanted a sign of what will happen with Yeshua. So the scribes and the Pharisees who were from Jerusalem came to Yeshua saying, "Why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread." It's about washing hands. Matthew 15 is not about food. And you can confirm this by reading verse 20, going to the end, and seeing, "These are the things which defile a man, but to eat without unwashed hands does not defile a man." Matthew 15, from verse 1 to 20, is not about food. It is about having clean hands. And Yeshua says that when you eat with hands that are not clean, this does not defile you. But what comes out of your mouth, this is what defiles you. I don't read this verse to my children, otherwise they say, "You see, even Yeshua said we don't need to wash our hands before we eat." I rather send them to wash their hands before dinner or so. But the other factor in this whole thing is the Leviticus food laws don't really say that the food defiles you. If you want to make this about food, it's not about defilement. The Leviticus food law says that certain foods are like an abomination, they're terrible. Certain animals, that makes you unclean when you touch them, not when you eat them, when you touch them. So like lizards and all kinds of stuff, don't touch them even. That makes you unclean. But the eating of food doesn't really defile you. The worst is if you eat something that you shouldn't, you're unclean till the evening, you're fine. So this is not a question of defilement. Unclean food, clean food is not about defilement. It's more about living a healthy life and a good life, a life that God expects of us to live. God didn't make all these laws so that you can have a difficult life. You don't think, I'm already making it difficult for them. Once a week, they cannot collect any wood or manna. What else shall I do to make life hard for them? Oh, I am going to say certain foods they may not eat. God, that's not his character. His character is to give us the best. So when you eat food that is not clean, it's not good for you. It doesn't defile you. Maybe you don't feel good or you feel unclean till the evening and you need to wash and then you go. But the food laws were not done away with through Yeshua. What he said here in Matthew 15 has to do with washing of hands. So when you read in Acts, you see that Peter, who walked with Yeshua for more than 3 years, well, that's the idea, plus minus 3 years, he's on the roof in Joppa, if you read the English, in Jaffa, in Hebrew, and he gets this vision, the vision of that white cloth that comes down, Acts 10, from verse 9. This white cloth that comes down, and then this voice says to him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." And on this white cloth, there's all kinds of animals that is not kosher, that they should not be eating. And then Peter says, "Not so, Lord, for I haven't eaten any common or unclean, anything that is that's common or unclean." That's interesting. If God says to me, "Tian, rise and kill this animal and eat it," then I will do it because God says so, right? But Peter has the audacity, he has this thing in him to say, "No, I won't. Not so, Lord." And then the voice again said to the second time, "What God has cleansed, you must not call common." And this happened 3 times, that this voice said to him, "Kill and eat, kill and eat." And then this object, this linen, was taken up. Remember, this is not something that physically happened. This is only a vision that he had. God wasn't physically telling Peter to eat something that is unclean, but he was giving him a message through this. The message in Acts, if you go on reading Acts 10, 11, 12, you see the message is nothing to do with food. The message has to do with the people, the fact that people are now clean. And because he was on his way to speak to Cornelius thereafter, because Cornelius sent men to come fetch him, and Cornelius wasn't a Jewish man, and it was not within their custom to go into the house of a non-Jew. And so the gospel was brought to the Gentiles. I'm one of the Gentiles, by the way. Maybe you guys are Jews, but I'm a Gentile. And the fact that God did this to Peter, saying, "Now you can also preach the gospel to the Gentiles," that is why Tianel is saved. It's why you and I are saved. This story is much bigger than food. It has nothing to do with food, but actually with the gospel and spreading the gospel to non-Jews. And it's interesting that Peter still had this idea when he goes to Cornelius's home, saying, "Yeah, it's not actually right that I should enter your house. It's uncommon. It's actually against our traditions and stuff. But God showed me a vision, and I know I may." Peter knew this has nothing to do with food. And when he explains this to the apostles, he explained it in that way. It has nothing to do with food. And when they later gave laws to the Gentiles, they spoke about food laws as well again. What you should eat, shouldn't eat, and so on. Because there are still relevant things for even the Gentiles. Not so much as written in Torah, but the Gentiles have certain laws to start out with, and then they grow from there. So, yeah, Peter believed in eating kosher. He believed it's good to check what you're eating, and Yeshua also kept that clearly, because if Yeshua abolished this law or took it away, then Peter would have known, and then he would have said, "Sure, let's have some bacon." But no, Peter didn't do that. He was even saying no to God. It's really amazing story to me. You think, how when God says something, to say no? It's like Abraham, the story of Lot. When God says something, Abraham negotiates. Abraham negotiates with God. That's just incredible for me. When God says something to me, I don't really negotiate. I kind of just say, okay, That's fine. And I have never said, no, I will not. I've misunderstood things, but I've never said, no, I will not, as Peter did. It's very interesting. So, yeah, the story that you see in Matthew 15 about Yeshua with the washing of the hands, the unclean comes from what we speak and how we live, not what we consume. And the same with food. Food doesn't make you unclean, but what comes out of you makes you unclean. It's true. That is true. But it's not good for you to eat unkosher food, but it's your choice what you want to do. So may you be blessed. I hope you enjoyed this answer. I know it's not very popular, but we have to say what we see in scripture. Shalom, shalom.